Sometimes the most ordinary nights hide the most unexpected moments. What begins as a simple evening watching a TV series can slowly turn into a deep and surprising conversation, one that reveals hidden thoughts, unspoken truths, and emotions that have been quietly waiting beneath the surface. In this mature and thought-provoking story, an anonymous narrator shares the unforgettable night he spent watching a show with his stepson while his wife was away. What started as harmless entertainment quickly evolved into a long, personal discussion about relationships, choices, regrets, and the complicated nature of human connections. As the night unfolds, boundaries of conversation begin to shift, and both men discover perspectives about life and family they had never shared before. This story explores honesty, vulnerability, and the moments when people finally say what they've been holding back for years. If you enjoy mature storytelling, emotional depth, and realistic conversations that challenge the way we see relationships, then you're going to find this story deeply engaging. Stay with us until the end, because sometimes the quietest conversations reveal the loudest truths. And if stories like this intrigue you, make sure you follow this channel for more powerful, thought-provoking narratives shared every week. I never expected that a quiet evening at home would change the way I looked at my life forever. It started as one of those ordinary nights that feel too simple to remember. My wife had left town for a few days to attend a work conference. She worked in marketing and traveled occasionally, which meant the house felt strangely quiet whenever she was gone. That night it was just me and my stepson. I've always kept his name out of stories like this, and I will continue to do so. Some things deserve privacy, even years later. He was 21 then. Old enough to be a man in his own right, but still young enough to carry a restless energy that reminded me of who I used to be. We had never been particularly close. Not distant either. Just polite. I married his mother when he was 14. By that age, boys already have their opinions about the men who suddenly appear in their lives. I never tried to replace his father, and he never tried to push me away. We simply learned to exist in the same house without friction. Over time, that turned into a quiet respect. That evening he walked into the living room holding a bowl of popcorn and said, "You want to watch something?" I shrugged. "Sure. What do you have in mind?" He scrolled through the streaming menu until he landed on a popular series everyone had been talking about. "People say this show is wild," he said. I laughed. "That usually means it's terrible." He grinned. "Or entertaining." So we sat down and started watching. At first it was exactly what you'd expect. Loud action scenes, dramatic music, complicated characters doing reckless things. The kind of show designed to keep people hooked. But halfway through the second episode, the tone shifted. The story turned darker. More personal. Two characters began having a long conversation about secrets, about relationships, about the kind of choices people make when they feel trapped in their own lives. The scene was quiet. Almost uncomfortable. My stepson paused the show suddenly. "You ever feel like people hide who they really are?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. "Sometimes," I said carefully. He leaned back into the couch, staring at the paused screen. "My mom always says people should be honest about what they want," he continued. I chuckled softly. "She also says people should eat more vegetables." He didn't laugh. Instead, he looked at me in a way he never had before. Serious. Curious. "You ever regret anything?" he asked. That question landed heavier than the first. I thought about it. Not the kind of polite thinking you do in casual conversation. Real thinking. The kind that drags old memories out of dusty corners. "Yeah," I admitted. "Everyone does." He nodded slowly. "I think people stay quiet about the wrong things," he said. The room felt different suddenly. The TV light flickered across the walls, but neither of us moved to press play again. "What do you mean?" I asked. He shrugged. "Like, people pretending they're happy when they're not." That sentence lingered in the air longer than it should have. I could have brushed it off. Changed the subject. Turned the show back on. But something about the way he said it made me answer honestly. You talking about someone specific? He hesitated. Then he said something I didn't expect. Sometimes I think my mom married you because it felt safe. That one hit me harder than I expected. Not because it was cruel, but because it might have been true. And once the words were spoken, neither of us could pretend we hadn't heard them. That was the moment the evening stopped being simple. Neither of us realized it yet. But the conversation that followed would change the way we looked at each other forever. The show never resumed. The remote stayed on the coffee table as the room settled into a quiet that felt strangely heavy. My stepson leaned forward with his elbows resting on his knees. The flickering light from the television painted faint shadows across his face. You ever think about how people end up in relationships they never really chose? He asked. I frowned. That sounds like a loaded question. He smirked. Maybe it is. I had learned over the years that younger people sometimes ask big questions when they're trying to understand their own lives. I assumed that was what this was about. So I answered carefully. Sometimes people choose comfort over passion, I said. And sometimes that's not a bad thing. He nodded thoughtfully. Comfort feels safe, he said. But safe can also be boring. I raised an eyebrow. You sound like you've been watching too many dramatic shows. He laughed quietly. Maybe. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he said something that shifted the conversation again. You and my mom don't seem unhappy, he said. But you don't seem excited either. That observation made me lean back in my chair. I couldn't argue with it. Marriage changes over time. The early sparks settle into routines. The excitement becomes stability. But hearing it described that way felt oddly uncomfortable. Long relationships look different from the outside, I said. He nodded slowly. I guess. Then he added quietly. I've always wondered what kind of man you really are. That question made me laugh. You've known me for years. He shook his head. I've known the version you show my mom. That was an interesting distinction. And what version do you think that is? I asked. The responsible one. His tone wasn't mocking. Just observant. Responsible isn't a bad thing, I said. I know, he replied. But it's not the whole person either. The conversation had taken on a strange intensity now. It was the kind of conversation people usually have with close friends late at night. Not with family. You ask a lot of questions, I said. He shrugged. Curiosity. Then he leaned back against the couch again. I think people hide parts of themselves, he said quietly. Sometimes because they're afraid. I studied him for a moment. Are you talking about me? I asked, or yourself? He smiled slightly. Maybe both. That was when I realized something. This wasn't just idle conversation. He was trying to understand me. Not as his stepfather. As a person. And strangely, I found myself answering with the same honesty. Everyone has parts of themselves they keep private, I said. That doesn't mean they're fake. He nodded. I know. Then he said something unexpected. I think you're more interesting than people realize. I laughed again. That's generous. No, he said. Just observant. For a moment, the room felt oddly calm. Two people talking without the usual roles they were supposed to play. No stepfather. No stepson. Just two men sharing thoughts. But that kind of openness can be dangerous. Because once people start speaking honestly, they sometimes say things they can't take back. And neither of us realized it yet. But the next question he asked would push the conversation into territory we had never imagined. The room had grown quiet in that strange way that happens when a conversation becomes more personal than expected. The television screen had gone dark after sitting paused too long. Now the only light in the living room came from a lamp in the corner, casting a soft yellow glow across the furniture. My stepson sat back with his arms folded loosely across his chest. For the first time that night, he seemed unsure of himself. "You ever wonder how different your life would be if you made other choices?" he asked. I chuckled quietly. Every adult thinks about that at some point. He nodded. But most people don't talk about it. That's because talking about it doesn't change anything. He studied my face for a moment, like he was trying to decide whether to say something. Then he asked the question that changed everything. "Do you love my mom, or do you just care about her?" The words hung in the air like a weight. That was not a casual question. Not the kind someone asks lightly. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. "That's complicated." He tilted his head slightly. "How?" I rubbed my hand along my jaw, thinking carefully about how to answer. "Love changes," I said finally. "When people first fall in love, everything feels intense. Exciting. Emotional. And later?" he asked. "Later, it becomes quieter." He nodded slowly. "Comfort again." Something like that. He looked down at his hands for a moment. Then he said something that surprised me. "I don't think my mom understands you." I raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold statement." "I'm serious," he said. "She thinks she does. But I don't think she sees the whole person." His tone wasn't critical. It sounded almost thoughtful. "Why do you think that?" I asked. He shrugged slightly. "Because I've been watching you two for years." That made me laugh quietly. Observant kid. "I notice things," he replied. For a moment he seemed hesitant again. Then he asked another unexpected question. "Do you ever feel lonely? Even when someone's sitting right next to you?" That question struck deeper than the others. Because the truth was, yes. Many people in long relationships feel that way sometimes. But admitting it felt strange in this context. "Sometimes," I said carefully. He nodded like he had expected that answer. "I think a lot of people do," he said. Then he leaned forward again, resting his elbows on his knees. "I don't think people talk honestly enough," he continued. "About what?" I asked. "About what they really want." The room seemed smaller suddenly. His eyes met mine, and there was a strange seriousness there I had never noticed before. "What do you want?" I asked. He laughed quietly. "I'm still figuring that out." Then he paused. "But I think people should be honest with themselves." That sentence lingered. And in that moment I realized something about the conversation we were having. It wasn't just curiosity. It was trust. He was speaking to me in a way he never had before. Not as the teenager who once lived in the same house, but as someone who wanted to understand adulthood. And strangely, I found myself respecting that. But honesty can lead conversations into dangerous territory. Because once people begin sharing truths, they sometimes uncover emotions they never expected. And that night was only beginning. By that point the show had completely faded from our minds. The living room had grown quieter, the late-night stillness wrapping around the house. Outside, the faint hum of distant traffic drifted through the windows, but inside it felt like time had slowed. My stepson stood up and stretched his arms. "You want another drink?" he asked, nodding toward the kitchen. "Sure," I replied. A few minutes later he returned with 2 glasses of soda and dropped back onto the couch. The conversation resumed naturally, like neither of us had noticed how strange the evening had become. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said. I smirked. "Pretty sure you already have." He laughed. "Fair point." Then he leaned forward slightly. What advice would you give someone about relationships? That was a heavy topic for a casual night. Depends on the situation, I said. Let's say someone feels like they're living the life everyone expects them to live, he continued. But they're not sure it's the life they actually want. That question sounded more philosophical than personal. But the way he asked it made me wonder. You talking about yourself? I asked. He shrugged. Maybe. I considered my answer carefully. Most people build their lives around expectations, I said. Family expectations. Social expectations. Cultural expectations. And that's bad, he asked. Not necessarily, I said. But sometimes people forget to ask themselves what they really want. He nodded slowly. I think that happens a lot. Then he studied me again. You ever feel like you're living someone else's idea of a perfect life? I laughed quietly. You ask questions like a therapist. Answer the question, he said with a grin. I took a slow sip of my drink. Sometimes, I admitted. He didn't seem surprised. Yeah, he said softly. I figured. The honesty between us had reached a point where neither of us felt the need to pretend anymore. And strangely, that openness made the conversation feel deeper. More real. You ever regret not taking risks? He asked. Everyone does, I replied. What kind of risks? Different kinds. He leaned back again, studying the ceiling for a moment. Then he said something that made the room feel different again. I think people underestimate you. Why's that? I asked. They think you're predictable. I laughed. That's not exactly an insult. He smirked. No. But I don't think it's true either. The air between us carried a strange mix of curiosity and respect. The kind that forms when two people finally see each other without the usual roles attached. And somewhere in that long conversation, I realized something unexpected. We weren't just talking. We were understanding each other. In a way we never had before. And sometimes that kind of connection can change how people see the world around them. The conversation lasted far longer than either of us planned. By the time we finally noticed the clock, it was past 2 in the morning. The house was completely silent now. Even the distant sounds from outside had faded. My stepson stood up and stretched again, shaking his head slightly. Didn't realize we'd been talking this long, he said. Neither did I replied. He grabbed the empty glasses and carried them into the kitchen. I heard the sink running briefly before he returned. For a moment we just stood there in the living room. Two people who had shared a conversation neither of us expected. You know, he said, I never thought we'd talk like this. I smiled slightly. Most people don't. He nodded thoughtfully. I always saw you as distant. That's fair, I said. But tonight I realized something. What's that? I asked. You're not distant, he replied. You're just careful about what you show people. That observation made me laugh softly. Years of experience. I respect that, he said. Then he added something I didn't expect. I'm glad we talked. So am I. And strangely, I meant it. That night hadn't changed anything dramatic. No secrets were revealed. No dramatic confessions. But something important had shifted. Understanding. Respect. Two people who had shared a house for years had finally seen each other clearly. As individuals. Not just family roles. He turned toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. Good night, he said. Good night, I replied. I stayed in the living room for a few minutes after he left. Thinking. About life. About choices. About how strange it is that sometimes the most meaningful conversations happen when you least expect them. The TV screen was still dark. the paused show forgotten. But that quiet evening had become something far more important. A reminder that sometimes the simplest moments lead to the deepest understanding. And sometimes the conversations we never planned change the way we see each other forever. Thank you for taking the time to experience this story. Moments like these remind us that life is often shaped by the conversations we never planned to have. Sometimes a simple night, a quiet room, and an honest discussion can change how we see the people around us forever. If this story kept you thinking or made you reflect on the hidden layers of relationships, then you're exactly the kind of reader this channel was created for. Here, we share powerful, mature, and emotionally intense stories that explore the complicated side of human experiences. Don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts about the story. Your engagement helps bring more stories like this to life and allows this community of storytelling lovers to grow stronger. And most importantly, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. There are many more compelling narratives, shocking twists, and unforgettable characters waiting for you right here on this channel. Because sometimes, the most fascinating stories are the ones people rarely dare to tell. Disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and storytelling purposes. The characters, events, and situations are fictional and do not represent real individuals or real-life incidents. This content is intended for mature audiences and is shared as part of creative storytelling on this channel. Any resemblance to actual persons or events is purely coincidental.